A horror movie was released at the end of 1996, and it was originally planned to be a movie making fun of the horror genre. To everyone's surprise, including its creators, the movie became iconic. With a budget of $14 million, it grossed $170 million at the box office and also earned the love of the audience members all over the world. We're talking about the movie Scream, that shows a masked killer hunting teenagers. If you haven't watched it, you've definitely heard of it. The movie got even more popular because of the parody called Scary Movie, which also became iconic. But there's one thing even dedicated fans don't know about. Scream is inspired by real events, and we'll talk about them today. The fact that Scream is connected to a number of real murders became known only in 1997, when Kevin Williamson, the man who created the plot of the movie, was giving an interview. He told the reporters that the idea to make Scream came to him while he was watching a documentary about the Gainesville murders. These events that took place 6 years before the release of the movie really scared Kevin. It was dark outside and he was alone at home, which only made everything seem creepier. During a commercial break, he suddenly heard noises in the house and started panicking. Kevin looked around the house and found an open window. He was so scared that he took a kitchen knife and called his friend to ask him to come to his place. This story of true crime events had this effect on him. Kevin had nightmares for a week after this incident. It was then that he realized that the story of the Gainesville Ripper could be the basis for a good horror movie. Now, you and I will be transported back to 1990 to look at those events. The student city of Gainesville in the sunny state of Florida was called a student paradise on Earth. With a population of just over 100,000 people, it occupied an area of almost 66 square miles. On August 20th, 1990, the city officially made it to the top 10 most beautiful and safest places in the United States. Taking advantage of this, the Gainesville government decided to turn this place into a tourist mecca, investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in advertising this paradise on Earth. Local hotels, restaurants, and other companies also invested a ton of money anticipating the influx of tourists. What could possibly go wrong? On August 25th, a policeman received a radio message about a murder. He was sent to an apartment where two 17-year-old students lived, Christina Powell and Sonia Larson. The officer almost vomited after entering the apartment because of what he saw. The two girls were dead and extremely mutilated, and their bodies were clearly placed in obscene poses after their death. Moreover, the killer washed his victims, spending a huge amount of shampoo on their heads. The crime shocked the whole city that was just recently considered one of the safest in the country. That's when the authorities realized that the positive reputation could come to an end. And it became clear the very next day that there was an actual serial killer operating in the city. On August 26th, another police officer received a similar radio message about a murder. He was sent to an apartment where an 18-year-old student, Krista Hoyt, lived. His partner and he immediately realized that it was done by the same killer as soon as they entered the apartment. The girl wasn't just killed, but subjected to torture, and her body was put in an obscene pose, just like the last time. Her hair was also washed with a huge amount of shampoo. As soon as the news spread throughout the city, the students started to panic. It was obvious that the killer chose random people, and anyone could become his victim. No one had any doubts whether he would continue to kill. There was only one question: when exactly was he going to make his next move? Many students who lived alone started to form groups. People started to move in with each other so that they would not be on their own day and night. All bats and door locks were swept off the store shelves. Students of local universities did their best to protect themselves from an unknown killer. but not everyone succeeded. 2 days after the last murder, the killer broke into an apartment rented by 23-year-old Tracy Pauls and her classmate Manuel Taboda. The guy was almost 6'5" and played football, but this didn't help him when he faced the monster. The killer murdered both of them, doing all the same atrocities with the girl. So in just a few days, the killer murdered 5 students. It was difficult to overestimate the level of panic that swept through the city. The police was under tremendous pressure. The authorities, residents, and businessmen who spent millions of dollars a week ago expecting an influx of tourists, all of them demanded to find the killer as soon as possible. Under such pressure, the police really did everything they could to solve this case, and on August 30th, already made a big announcement. The killer was caught. The suspect was a student named Edward Humphrey. The guy was troubled. His face was covered with scars, and he was no stranger to the local police precinct. But most importantly, shortly before the murders, he passed all 3 apartments where the victims lived in search of cheap housing. All of this led the public to believe that the police did indeed find the right guy. The headlines of newspapers were announcing that the city was now safe because the dangerous monster was in prison. Indeed, since Humphrey's arrest, not a single murder was committed in Gainesville, and the residents could finally relax. A week later, on September 7th, in a city called Ocala near Gainesville, a man named Danny Rolling was arrested for armed robbery. He tried to rob a bank, but the employee managed to surreptitiously press the panic button. First of all, the police found out that Rolling was involved in a series of robberies that took place in the district in recent days. But then, the most interesting things started to unfold. The tools that were taken from him during the arrest were very similar to those used by the Gainesville Ripper. Furthermore, the police matched the murders in Gainesville with Rolling's location and found out that he lived in this city and left it immediately after Humphrey's arrest. But that's not all. The police learned that in 1989, a brutal murder was committed in the city of Shreveport. An unidentified criminal killed William Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and 8-year-old grandson Sean. The killer put their bodies in obscene poses and washed the girl's hair with loads of shampoo. And you know what? Rolling lived in Shreveport at that time. Then the police started to seriously think about it. Is he connected to all these murders? Additional evidence was soon found to support this theory. The police found Rolling's stash in the forest where he hid the stolen money. But there was also something even more interesting. Audio diaries on cassettes with some hints to a series of murders and things that belonged to the victims of the Gainesville Ripper. All of this was already enough to bring murder charges against him. But the trial dragged on for many years. The killer refused to admit his guilt. Only in 1994, listening to his lawyer, he made a full and frank confession to all the murders committed in Gainesville. By that time, the police had already released Edward Humphrey. He later admitted that people continued to see him as a murderer until Rolling finally confessed. During the trial, Rolling spoke in great detail about the atrocities he committed with the victims. He refused to answer only one question. Why did he wash the victim's hair with shampoo? The killer said that he would take this secret with him to hell. As for the motives, everything is very simple here. After seeing that Gainesville was recognized as one of the safest cities and called a paradise, Rolling decided to show everyone that it wasn't the case. The murders themselves simply gave him pleasure. In other words, there were no specific reasons that prompted him to commit murders. His deranged and sick mind was to blame. He also stated that he wanted to become as famous as another killer, Ted Bundy. Rolling's lawyer hoped that the confession would help him avoid the death penalty, but this didn't happen. That same year, in 1994, he was sentenced to lethal injection. As it often happens, he lived for many years before the execution of the sentence and managed to shock the public more than once. Danny Rawling managed to get married while in prison. His beloved was Sandra London, a journalist specializing in serial killers. She called Rawling a great man and was even proud of the murders he committed. She either had serious mental health problems or it was all just cold calculation. After the death of her husband, she published a book called The Making of a Serial Killer. Being officially married to Rawling, she could regularly visit him in prison and collect information for the book. Rawling's execution took place on October 25, 2006, 12 years after he was sentenced. Taking advantage of his right to get any type of dinner before the execution, the killer ordered lobster, shrimp, baked potatoes, sweet tea, and strawberry cheesecake. When he was being injected, he was singing a church hymn and continued to do so until he passed out. Shortly before his execution, he confessed to a priest that he murdered 3 people in Shreveport, but the police wasn't able to prove his involvement. So, he killed 8 people. His dream of being like Ted Bundy was partially fulfilled. He was executed in the same room. Of course, this was just a coincidence. One of the reasons why the execution of the sentence dragged on for 12 years was Rawling's endless appeals. Until the last moment, he hoped that the court would take pity on him and change the punishments to a life sentence. Fortunately for the entire civilized society, this never happened. To fully understand who Rawling was, we need to take a quick look at his biography. As is the case with most serial killers, he grew up surrounded by cruelty. His father constantly beat him and said that Danny was an unwanted child. His mother and younger brother also suffered. In his youth, he joined the army, but he was expelled from there because of his mental disorder. Then Danny got married, but his wife left him. In 1990, a couple of months before the start of this series of murders, Rawling shot his father several times, but he survived. He was on good terms with his younger brother. Before his execution, he spent several hours with him, and a priest also talked to them. When Scream appeared on the screens, Rawling was spending his time in a cell awaiting the verdict. Most likely, the prison authorities didn't allow him to watch movies, so the killer probably didn't see it and didn't know that he became the inspiration for the plot. However, most fans of the movie still don't know about this. Maybe after this video, Scream will be seen by you in a different light, although the movie didn't show even half of all the cruelty with which Rawling killed people. Thank you for watching.